So it is my great pleasure to be here with Riana Elise Anderson. She is the winner of the 2024 Kellina Craig-Henderson FAB Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access, or IDEA Early Career Award. And the award, again, is named after Kellina Craig-Henderson, who is an outstanding teacher, scholar, program officer, and administrator at NSF, who was deeply committed to improving access and opportunity for individuals and institutions that have historically been underrepresented and denied equal access in the sciences, especially the psychological science. So we're here with Riana, who is currently an associate professor of social work at Columbia University School of Social Work. On the whole, Dr. Anderson aims to facilitate healing in Black families with practical applications of her research and clinical services, as well as through public engagement, teaching, mentoring, and policy recommendations. She uses mixed methods to study discrimination and racial socialization in Black families and applies her findings to help families reduce their racial stress. She's particularly interested in how family-based interventions help to improve Black youth's psychosocial well-being and health-related behaviors. She is the developer and director of the Embrace, Engaging, Managing, and Bonding Through Race intervention, and loves to translate her work for a variety of audiences, particularly those whom she serves in the community, via blogs, videos, and literary articles. As well, she is a proud daughter of Detroit, Michigan.
Yes.
So Riana and I have known each other for a while.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would say is from the very first time that I met you, when you were a student, I was particularly impressed by your intelligence, your innovation, but also your commitment to social justice. So while we're getting started, could you share with us where you got your personal commitment to social justice and making a difference?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today, Dr. Sellers. Truly an honor to be with you and to be the recipient this year of this phenomenal award. So you've already named it, and anyone who's ever spoken to me for longer than a second, or if my office were set up, you'd see it, but it's still here. Like the word Detroit is never far from me. So Detroit is the reason. I'm actually in the midst of writing a book right now, and my agent was telling me to like tell the audience more about who you are in this intro section. And my story just keeps going back to Detroit. And I found this really interesting way of thinking about who I am, which leads to what I do, right? So I'm a Greek and Black woman, and there are only a few cities where you're going to find a Greek man who could step to a Black woman and create a me, right? Like there's not too many places where this can be. So Chicago, Queens, and Detroit are like the three biggest Greek towns. In the 80s, here I am, and I'm growing up on the West Side, which was a place that Black families couldn't even live a decade before. But I was able to benefit from all of these perfect storms that were happening in Detroit to allow me to be there. So when I think about my commitment to social justice, it's because of the city that I was born and raised in and its experiences of being redlined and gentrified and tossed through all of these policies and experiences that made it one of the most segregated cities that we see today. So that's how I think about why I'm so committed to it. It's because Detroit made me that way.
Well, so you define yourself as being deeply committed, and I love this, to drop kicking racism with the goal of engaging in resistance for healthy minds, bodies, and spirit for Black youth and families. So can you talk about what role did your family play in particular towards you having that commitment and that framework?
Yeah, I'll start with what the heck drop kicking is and why I use that term. So drop kicking came about when I was trying to teach about this X to Y relationship that we talk about as a predictor in psychology. So we know discrimination is driving this arrow toward mental health. And intervention work is all about bending or changing and hopefully one day absolving that relationship. But I thought about how particularly violent discrimination and racism is toward Black people and folk of color, and frankly, all of us, right? Like it's not healthy for any of us to experience it or to produce it. And so we had to have an equally forceful tool to get rid of it, and that's the drop kicking. How do we create a moderator that is an intervention or program, something that annihilates that X to Y relationship? How do we get that out the way? So yes, thinking about how that even came to be, you can't take two steps in my family's house without seeing a book, a statue, a jewelry. Like when we talk about for you in your groundbreaking work around racial identity and the work that that's led to with racial socialization and what we know about that, I have been socialized from a deeply identifying group of people who know from whom and whence they came, who are very clear about the importance of a strong racial identity, a very centric Black identity was what I grew up with. Even as a mixed woman, that was something that my mom was just very clear about. Like the world is not going to see you in the ways that your humanitarian father might or egalitarian father might. Like they're gonna see you as a Detroit girl or woman of color, right? So there were so many things in our house that embodied this spirit, this protective spirit of look at where we've come from, look at who your family is, look at the resilience that we even in America have been able to make it through, make it work, right? And it was everywhere in my family, and every family reunion, every like, I mean, it just you
Mhm.
name it. There was a clear focus on race and ethnicity. So it's no surprise to me whatsoever that I am studying and doing the work that I'm doing now, because that's what my whole life was up to grad school. So yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how your experience in a city like Detroit gave you or gives you both um, a sense of the challenges that one must face, but also the inspiration and how that has inspired you in your work?
Mm. I love that question. And it's one that I've brought up to a number of researchers when they're talking about these elements in inner cities that are so risk filled and lead to vulnerability and just eh, they speak of these things with such ill. But one example that's coming to mind is gangs, right? And like for me, I was never pressured into being in a gang, and maybe that's a unique experience, but I knew who they were on our block. And I also knew that they were looking after me when I walked up and down the block. And so for some people, that could be a very protective experience. And I found that when there were issues on our block, those were people that I felt that could stand up for me, that could protect me. And once I understood their own history, that so many of them were looking for families and that this was a family bond for them, and that gangs didn't even start off with violence as the main crux of it, that may have come from drugs that were funneled into the United States. It's all of these social issues that continue to get at this erosion of some of these family structures that Black people continue to create to support and protect each other. It's just really interesting to me to think of them as pitted in one way only when my lived experience with them was so different. So that's one example that I can think of as you're talking about Detroit, but very much like making sure that my family knew where I was, that they were monitoring, supervising, making sure that I was safe and taken care of, but who that family was could have extended again to members of the neighborhood, to friends, parents, etc. There were so many people that made up my family and their concern for me that I never saw Detroit as this thing that I've heard on the news, or even worse, growing up, when I would tell people where I was from verbatim, they would say, "You haven't been shot yet? You're
Mm.
not dead?" And I'm just like, "What are you talking? What are you talking
Mhm.
about? I don't know what you're saying." So that's what comes to mind when you ask that question.
Well, in your work, what comes across consistently is not only defining the challenges, as you said, and the challenges that the community faces, and oftentimes faces as a result of outside influences and outside inequities, but also recognizes the humanity, the uh, sense of self, purpose, community, faith, love,
Yeah.
that's there. And so I want to commend you for that work. So with that in mind, can you talk about the importance of programs like Embrace?
Yeah, yeah. Um, even as you're talking, some of the things that come to mind, one of the concepts I've been championing lately is this idea of neighbors. Um, because so often in our work, we see participants or the sample or the community, we see them as folks over there. And I don't find myself talking about people like that. Like, it's very hard for me to see them as numbers or so separate from anything that I am or that I do. And programs like Embrace for me are about seeing families as my own, as neighbors, as people who I'm in community with, and a bit about Embrace, it's families who want to talk to their children about race and racism, and also a recognition that clinicians don't quite know how to talk about race and racism. Just by virtue of them becoming a clinician, there's nothing that they've unlocked to say, "Oh, I'm now competent in these conversations." So we've spent a lot of time just understanding what are the roadblocks that anyone has talking about race and racism. How can we help families and clinicians to improve on these conversations, but not that these families are so different than any of ours or us, because we also struggle with race. So what are some of those common nuggets that are challenging for everyone? How can we help our neighbors just like we would hope that they help us? So that's how I think about programs like Embrace. We can't develop things for folks over there. We have to really think about the collective us. How can we help each other to get through some really tough content?
Now, given the fact that you've been very successful in publishing in traditional academic outlets and been an important voice in our understanding of, or intellectual understanding of, issues of race and racism, particularly in the experiences of African American. Uh, at the same point in time, you've also done an amazing job of um, developing conversations, being in conversation, being in community with folks outside of academia, and making sure your work has an impact in those spaces. And can you talk a little bit about what that has been like, and what are the rewards? What are the challenges? And do you have any tips or suggestions for other early career scholars who are thinking about ways to make sure that their scholarship has a public impact?
So you want me to answer 8 questions? I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
so,
Okay.
or any one of those that you would like.
Cool, cool, cool. This is the part of the story where I love to thread you and other folks in. So we have this amazing conference called the Black Graduate Conference in Psychology, or BGCP. And I was a first-year grad student who went, had the time of my life. It really changed my life, and I was able to meet you and amazing other scholars who are impacting the field. And my second year there, I see this poster, and there's a guy talking about adolescent Black males and externalizing and depression. And I'm like, this is me. Like, what is discrimination? Like, this is me. What is he doing? And I'm like, excuse me, Sean, Christopher Tracy Jones. Like, this is my work. What are you talking about? So that 2011 summer and that interaction that summer has changed my life. So this colleague who I met, Dr. Sean Jones, who's now a tenured associate professor at BCU, um, when we met, we had this synergy, and we knew we wanted to change the science. That was clear, but we also wanted to change the process of how other people could benefit from the science. As two people who are from these urban spaces, Detroit and San Antonio, respectively, our question was, how is grandma going to understand what we're talking about? If we come home and talk whatever we're learning about in school to grandma, is she going to get any of that? And we knew the answer was no. So from 2011, our goal was, how do we start translating what we know back into the world? So to fast forward through this timeline, we developed this series of psychological and educational entertainment videos, and we tried to make a mental health minute, our mental health minute, into these 1 minute videos. We often failed miraculously to get it down to 1 minute, but around a minute and a half-ish, 2 minutes-ish of what does therapy look like? What is depression? How do I know it's time to go to therapy? What does anxiety look like? So we took these very basic concepts of psychology, tried to make it entertaining, tried to make it nugget filled. I say all that history because I didn't know a decade later that I was going to be in front of cameras where I had to get these sound bites down to 90 seconds as well. So if you're taking these really complicated data sets or questions that people are throwing at you, and you're trying to get it back out into the world, I find myself drawing constantly from how do we do this when we did this video, or even one example, my favorite story of all time. I was during the coronavirus, the very early months of the pandemic, I was on a show where we were having parents and children ask the experts questions. So I was talking to a younger audience, and a 5-year-old had their question that I heard for the first time while I was live. And she asked, how is the coronavirus going to end? And I'm just sitting there, as I don't know why they kicked it to the psychologist, that when there were medical professionals on there, but they were like, Dr. Anderson, you take this one. I'm like, oh, okay. So I pulled straight from some analogies that Sean and I used from our mental health minute. And I was like, it's kind of like a car. And I started rolling with that. And the family reached out to me afterwards, and they were like, it was so clear. Our 5-year-old daughter got it. And, it's coming straight from those preparatory things that Sean and I did starting a decade ago. So it's divine, right? It's ordained. It's all the things that have led me to be able to do this. But it also goes back to what I said before about just being in community. Like I can't talk a language to different rooms if I'm not in those rooms and listening and sitting and being attentive. I have to know how they talk. And some people call it code switching. I just call it knowing the code. Like what is it? What is it to be in this room and to know how folks are talking to each other? How am I mindful of that? How do I talk to grandma? How do I talk to this professor emeritus? How do I go in all of these spaces and know, oh, this is what I have to say here to get that language out? But it's all from divine ordering. For sure.
Well, it is also relevant in terms of the specific work you do with regards to racial socialization, that the literature historically has operationalize racial socialization primarily, not exclusively, through various paper and pencil instruments, and it feels much more uh, thoughtful, much more planned, and hasn't always captured the fact that parents are constantly giving messages to their kids with regards to what race means, and not just parents, and kids are also giving messages to parents about what race means and influences their identities and their perspectives. Can you talk a little bit about where you see the field going and where you would like to see it go in terms of the future with respect to this work?
Yeah. And I'll actually pick up on something I didn't say from the last question too, which was just like how can young people, what are some tips for young people in the field um to glean from this translation piece? And I think it blends in nicely here too, which is just I was able to spend a year on fellowship at a Stanford Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. And I was silly enough to go the tech route there. I was like, heck, I'm already at Stanford. I'm in the, Silicon Valley. Like, let me just go ahead and do some tech stuff. And the tech mantra is like break stuff and move fast, right? It's all about just like constant iteration and movement and change. And I think we could learn from that, right? So I would dare not hurt your ears because I know how important good empiricism is for you. You are a deep thinker. You want us to move intentionally. And I think that has its place. And I think working across teams, if you have Rob Sellers, if you have someone who is going to make sure that the work is done really thoughtfully and intentionally on the team, and having someone who's from this generation that really thinks very differently and quickly and with multiple screens, like they look and think differently. So the advice there, I think, for young folks is to not throw out what's been done. That's crucial. So you should not be throwing out what has been done, but to look at it from all sorts of angles and to ask questions and to tinker and to say, like, what would it be like to try something a little different, a little novel, asking the scholar expert, because I've asked you 1.5 million questions over time, and with mentors, they get so tired of me, but I'm constantly just like, what about this? What if we change this? But I think differently than they do, and certainly the mentees of mine think differently than I do. And so being willing to go across these different levels so that we can have eyes on new approaches, new strategies, while being mindful of what it took to get us there, I think is really important. So briefly for the translation piece, it's the same story. There's a reason why not every single scholar is on the TV and making comments. It's hard work, but it's also rewarding when we're able to figure out what to say. But there are people who are really good at producing the data that it takes for us to speak on that. So figuring out the lanes that make sense for you and knowing that it's very hard to do both very, very well and it's very time consuming. But if we work across, I think we can be really beneficial in creating new and novel ways, new and novel translations of the work.
Great. No, I would agree wholeheartedly that the work that we do should evolve. If it's the same work over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, then there's a problem. The goal is always to make it better. Now, you mentioned your students, so I'd love to hear a little bit about your mentoring philosophy and how your own experiences as a student have impacted the way in which you mentor other students.
Oh man, I didn't know I had to print out the little binder that I make. Yeah, no, mentoring is my favorite part of this academic journey. And if anyone has had to listen to my very corny talk on this. It's about Mr. Potato Head.
Okay.
And you think about the potato as like the primary mentor that you have, but then elements of the potato head, like the arms, might be someone who's helping you to write, or the legs are going to walk you in the conference to meet your, dream Diane Hughes, like Howard Stevenson. Oh my gosh, like I'm going to walk you over there and I'm going to introduce you. Or the mouthpiece might be the person who helps you to refine how you talk about it. So being any element of that Mr. Potato Head for others has been really rewarding for me as someone who, again, giving a shout out to BGCP, this conference that normalized access to stellar Black scholars who developed these measures and theories, who created these level 1 interventions that taught us how to iterate and evolve into level 2 and level 3. Like having that access and having them be so generous with data, with time, with meetings, taught me how to think of myself as a mentor that can help in any of these different spaces. So less of philosophy and more just like, if I have the capacity, and I'll tell people I have this much time, so we could do like a mini mentoring moment in the elevator. We could do like a walk and talk because I got to eat at some point. So let's go get some food and talk. I'll let people know this is the capacity that I have right now, but I can support you in these ways. So take me up on that when I'm offering that to you. I think again, because I was poured into so much, it is incredibly hard for me to not support young people, but I'm also learning to say I'm no longer the freshest, youngest, person anymore. So please, my mentees, I need y'all to step up and start mentoring people as well, because now they're starting to try to skip generations and come to me, and I'm like, I don't know what it's like to go to grad school no more. Like I need help. I think that's a part of it, is the scaffolding and the training around how do we support mentees throughout their career, um, and knowing now I'm in a new space, literally both physically, literally, like all of the ways one can be new, but I'm a newly associate and I don't know what that's like either. So knowing I'm still going to have to reach out to full professors like you, to get support. That's just a part of it. How do we continue to reach up and down and to build this Mr. Potato Head so that we know what skills we have and we're not one thing for every person, and every person is not looking at us to be the one thing.
Mm. Well, we're coming close to the end, time-wise. So I want to end with this last question. So, what are your goals for your work over the next 5 or 10 years? Where do you want to make the most impact?
I want to end racism.
Okay. In the next 5 years?
Maybe like year. I don't think I need 5. Give me
Okay.
like a year.
Okay. I love it.
Um, I, I do think I was naive for a number of years, thinking that it could be done quickly and with me only. And so I'm sharing this kind of in jest because I've learned a lot in the past 2 years being on 2 different fellowships and trying to attack racism from different ways, to understand just it how entrenched racism is in our everyday lives and in our communities, and how um, capricious it is, how it learns to shift as it sees the axe coming, or the leg coming to drop kick it. It knows how to shift and evolve. So I'm learning too how to be more gracious with myself so that I don't have such a lofty goal, but I'm never doubting that I can reduce it or eliminate it. So it's not happening in the next 5 to 10 years, but some short-term goals in my head as a new Columbia professor, just like Michigan and a number of other fantastic institutions that were able to hire a number of people through these anti-racism initiatives. My goal is to not let the university forget that they've hired us and what we can do. So as a former student and former faculty member at Michigan, I learned a lot from the racism lab and what they were able to do through this interdisciplinary approach. My hope is to replicate some of that success here on campus and to understand what would it be like to take the 30 people hired across schools, departments, et cetera, bring them into one place and say, at the very least, we can have a conference with each other. We can talk to each other's students. We can potentially try to have one project that we work on for the year from all these different angles: law, chemistry, psychology, public health. How do we attack this problem so that we actually do chip away and meaningfully reduce this issue of racism, whether it's as small as at the university or like in the city of New York or the world? How could that work if we do actually come together? So that really is what I'm hoping to make an impact on in the next 5 to 10 years. Also writing a book, also just finishing up an app, also getting our intervention off the ground. So who knows where you'll see me next, but I'm using a lot of different tools to end this really pernicious problem that we have in America.
Wow. Well, Rihanna, it has absolutely been my pleasure, as it always is when I have an opportunity to talk with you. Um, I had the great pleasure and honor to know Kelly Craig-Henderson pretty well. And I cannot imagine anyone being a more appropriate winner of this first Kelly Craig-Henderson Idea Early Career Award. I know that she would be deeply proud.
I'm
So,
not going to cry today, but thank you so much, Dr. Sellers,
well,
truly.
you know, and again, as one of the older folks these days, which I can't figure out how that happened, you know, despite the current zeitgeist and the challenges that we face, when I have opportunities to talk with folks like you, I have nothing but excitement, optimism, confidence in our future. I know that you will handle it, that you all have got this. So
Thank
thank you.
you. And thank you for preparing us. Thank you for giving us the tools. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.